So everybody hear me all right? I'm Matt. I work on Moment.js. Everybody in the room use Moment.js? A few people? Yes, lots of people, pretty much everybody. We've been lucky enough to become one of the premier datetime libraries for JavaScript. We didn't set out to do that. It would have been nice if JavaScript date was good from the beginning. So that's kind of what I want to talk to you about today. How did we get here? What can you do today? Are there other good options other than Moment.js? I think there are. And what are we going to do in the future? So I work at Microsoft. I'm a site reliability engineer, which means I don't do a lot of JavaScript in my daytime. I have been a JavaScript programmer for quite a while, though. And I am also a .NET developer. I mainly focus on the domain of date and time. So if you ever have questions about date, time, time zone, daylight saving time, how to schedule things, any of those sorts of topics, you can probably find me on Stack Overflow. That's usually where I hang out. I also have a lot of open source datetime related libraries, and if you've got datetime bugs in your open source project, I may have lurked on you and jumped in and fixed it, and you'd be like, but that's what I do. And I like cheese, because everybody likes cheese. So what is a date? Let's talk about dates. I think a date looks like this. January 1st. Everybody agree with me that's a date? Yeah? I think that's a date. But, this gets us into problems with JavaScript. If we take a look at this little demo that I made here, this is literally all I have. I have a HTML5 date input type, okay? And all I'm going to do with that is just give you the output. I'm going to feed the output of that value into a date object, and just because I'm only looking at the date, I'm going to say toDate string. And what happens, let's just say I was born today. Okay. What happened here? I picked May 7th, but I got May 6th. Has anybody ever run into this problem with the date object? This is one of the things that people yell and scream about the date object. What's going on here? What's going on here is that I'm from the United States, and I haven't adjusted this computer's time zone to be east of the UTC line. It's still west of it. So if you happen to be that, negative offsets from UTC, you'll find that JavaScript will throw your dates off by 1. And this happens because the ECMAScript specification originally wasn't clear about what to do when you only have a date. It just said, if I've got some value and I don't know the offset, then the offset must be UTC. Well, what's a UTC day? From UTC midnight to UTC the end of midnight. The only people that I know of that are always on a UTC day are mostly in Iceland. Iceland is on GMT year-round. Even in Greenwich, where they draw the Greenwich Mean Line, that's not on UTC all the time. They're UTC +1 right now for British summertime. So there's a discrepancy in the last two forms here between the ISO 8601 specification, which is where we get all of our date and time standards from, and the ECMAScript specification. And as you can see, the third item on there is a date and a time, and originally the ECMAScript specification said that should be UTC, but they later corrected it to be local. So fortunately for date and time forms, we now know that we are, all modern evergreen browsers will be on local time. But for date forms, it got stuck with UTC. And really this comes down to web reality. We wanted to change it, the implementers all wanted to change it, but when Chrome tried, there was so much lashback and so many bugs raised within a small 24-hour window that they just had to revert. And so the ECMAScript spec now says, for date-only forms, they're UTC, and that's just because that's the reality of the web that we've all had since the early days of the internet. But a date, what is a date? It's not just what we pointed out earlier. Well, it should be, but in JavaScript it's not. In JavaScript, it's not really a date, it's a timestamp. It's the number of seconds since, or the number of milliseconds since the Unix epoch, which is in terms of UTC. So you can't have, what did we lose? We lost display here, hold on. There we go. So we can't have just a date represented in terms of milliseconds. You all should probably know this, but not every day is a whole number of 24 hours exactly. And the days that aren't are random all around the world because of time zones. When we're in standard time and then we switch to summertime, or we call it daylight time in parts of the world, our day shrinks or gets longer. So we'll have a 23-hour local day or a 25-hour local day, depending on which way we're transitioning. That's during the spring forward, fall back thing. And if you live in this little island off the coast of Australia called Lord Howe Island, which is a wonderful vacation spot, they only switch by half an hour. So you'll have 23.5-hour day or 24.5-hour day. So you can't just measure a date in terms of milliseconds. It's the wrong type. I like to call it a date-ish. You know, we have the falsy, truthy. It's not a date, it's a date-ish. There's this wonderful quote, off by one in naming things. Cache invalidation doesn't really apply here. I usually throw time zones into the mix of things that are hard in computer science. So one wonders, like, you know, what were they thinking? Why did we do this? And I have to go back to the beginning. Brendan Ike, one of the inventors of JavaScript, called LiveScript back then, has been very clear on this point. They had very little time to do this, and they were just told, make it look like Java. And you know, he's told us many times, and there's a couple blog posts. It actually wasn't Brendan who implemented it, it was Ken Smith of Netscape. Took the Java util date code from Java in C in the implementation and translated it into the implementation for the early days of JavaScript. This is what that looked like. Everybody thinks it like all happened all at once, but if you look at the dates, we can see that like when they developed it, Java was in beta. Nobody had used this thing. They just said, well, it's Java going to JavaScript, and this is how Java does dates, so that's how JavaScript's going to do dates. And by the time Java 1.0 came out, the JavaScript prototype was kind of set in stone. And then when Java 1.1 came out, we deprecated almost all of the functionality from the date object. They moved it off to something called Java util calendar. So what we're stuck with in JavaScript is a model that was fundamentally broken and found pretty early on, and we never did anything about. We published ECMAScript 1.0 after the date deprecation and never went back and adjusted that. And that's just what we have today. So there's a lot of things that are wrong besides just the date parsing. I showed you how when you parse a date, you can be off by one. But look at this code. Can anybody guess what this result is? This looks reasonable. A lot of people would write something like this. Just think in your mind what you might think it is. I look at that and I say, well, it's December 31st and I'm adding a month, so it must be January 31st as a result. December? No. Yeah. March, yeah. So we end up in March. And we end up at March 2nd. But only when I run this code from this time zone here in Berlin. Because notice the original date values I gave it were in terms of local time, and it also did something implicit in this toISO string, which we'll also do in the TUTC or TUTC string or GMT string functions. It converted it from local time to UTC time, and it gave me a UTC-based timestamp. So not only do I end up on March 2nd, because I actually started on November 31st, which doesn't exist. So I'm started on January 31st. So I went to February 31st, which doesn't exist. So I went into March, and then I went back an hour for UTC. So there's a lot of things wrong with this. The other thing that it highlights is that data is mutable. Notice how I added a month? I had to get the month and then increment it and then rely on this bubbling functionality in order to move from one month to the next. These are really difficult concepts, especially for a beginner developer. Date in almost any other language is a value type. It's immutable. It doesn't change once you create it. If you add a month, you have a specific method. Add a month, and you get back the one with the month added. And the other thing that we have wrong with date is, notice nowhere in here did I say what time zone I was starting in. I just started in local time. So the only thing the date object supports is the local time of the environment it's running on and UTC. Well, that's really bad if you're a node developer because nobody cares about the time zone on your server. You really shouldn't care about the time zone on your server anyway. All right, let's just do one more here. I love this one. Strings and numbers should be interchangeable in most JavaScript things. We have string 0, a regular 0, 0, 0, or 0, 0, 0. Does anybody think they should all give the same result, whatever it might be? They kind of feel like they should be defaults. I'll give you a hint, they're in order. They're in descending order here. Every one of those things is going to give you something different. And that's, so the first one's because when you only pass a number as a string, it's treated as a year. So year 2000. And anything that is passed as a number is treated as a timestamp, so we're right at the epoch there. Notice it's not midnight on the one with the epoch, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, so it's not even the same time. I'm in the same time zone for all of those because this time zone is +1 in January. 1900 is because if you pass a year from 0 to 99, JavaScript data object treats that as 1900 to avoid Y2K problems. But as soon as you go to year 100, that is year 100. So they're not even sequential in order of the input parameters. And 1899, just because, well, the overflow situation I showed you before, we have no such thing as the 0th day of a month, so it goes back to 1 day. So what do we do about this? Well, we solve it with libraries. That's what Java did. Java came out with JOda time. If you're a Java developer, you should be familiar with JOda time. JOda time is now, or was the basis for this thing called JSR 3.10, which made its way into Java 8. And if you're using modern Java, you should be on Java 8 using the Java time package. That is basically JOda time reincarnate with a few tweaks to make it better. There is an alternate one that is also very good called time for J, and they take a little bit different philosophy between the two. On the JavaScript side, we also had to address this with libraries. Really early on, there was a date.js library. I don't recommend use that today just because it's in a poor state of maintainability. But Sugar and Moment came on the scene around 2011. And Sugar is still pretty good if you want to do something called natural language parsing. Like if you have a string that says like, what time is it 3 days and 2 months from now? And it's actually spelled out as a string. Sugar will parse that for you and try to make a good guess about it. So that's still a good library. But most people are using Moment. Moment does about 90% of the things you'd want to do with date and time. Maybe even 99%. But Moment isn't the only thing out there. There are people working on a port of the JOda time standard into JavaScript. That's the js-joda library. I think js-joda is pretty awesome. There's also this thing called date functions, which has gotten a lot of notoriety lately. Date functions says, instead of a very large JavaScript object, if all you need to do is add a month, let's just add a month. So it's just like you pull in individual functions for doing individual things. So I'm going to show you those 3 libraries, because that's what everybody uses. Moment is probably something, I saw the raise of hands, everybody's familiar with. We're very specific with Moment when we do our parsing. We don't make that assumption that the JavaScript data object had that said, I can tell what you want by the string you pass in. No, I can't always tell what you want. Sometimes you have to tell me. So if you give me a string with no context and you don't tell me what it is, then I'll assume it's local time because that's what the data object does. If you give me a string with no context and you tell me you want it as UTC, then I'll assume it's UTC. And we have time zone support through the Moment time zone library that imports the IANA standard time zone database that pretty much all modern computing uses. Moment's API is fluent and intentional, so we can do something like add 200 days, and then we can format that. I can tell you exactly what my input style should be, so there's no confusion on whether that's July 5th or May 7th, because I'm telling you explicitly that it's day, month, year format. The only problem that we have lately with Moment is it is still a mutable API, and that's because when it was originally developed, it was built using the JavaScript date object as its basis. So notice I clone the Moment here before I start adding to it. If I didn't do that, it wouldn't just output the same string here, but it would also change the value of this m variable. So it's important when you're working with Moment that you realize it does mutate the object as you work through its API. That's something we're considering for Moment 3.0. There's some work in progress on that, so hopefully we'll have a Moment 3.0 with an immutable API. And yes, you can do things like from now and get 7 months. You can validate simple dates. It does what it says it does, and it does it pretty good. Let's look at this date functions library I mentioned. Date functions, like I said, it's very lightweight and modular. The intent with date functions is every single function is its own module, so you only pull in the ones you need. If all I need is something that will format a string and add some days, then I just import those two functions. And it uses date objects, as I was saying. So I create a date object, I format it, I get the output. Again, remember the JavaScript date object has 0 base months. So it looks like I'm passing in January 1st. I'm not. I'm passing in February 1st. So when I format that as a string, I see it as February 1st. And again, with the add days function here, it does what it says it does. It adds days, and it is immutable. So it didn't change the value of D1 as it added days to create day 2. So if you want lightweight immutable functions, check out date functions. JS-joda, being the other library that I mentioned, is also really good. It also has an immutable API. It models separation of concerns very well. So we have a different object, which is a local date. And local in this context doesn't mean local to the computer. It means not local. It means could be local anywhere. It means somebody's local. And that's just terminology that's been borrowed over from the ISO 8601 standard into Joda time, into Java, and now up into JS-joda. So you may see that a few places. When we work with this API, we don't have to have the API guess what we want. We tell it specifically what we want. We say, here's a date, get the start of the day. I want that for Berlin. And then I want to know what the equivalent time is in the computer's local time or in UTC. I can do these things very easily. The start of day function is really interesting concept also. Keep in mind that because of those daylight saving time transitions, not every day starts right at midnight. So a start of day isn't just snap to midnight and truncate off data. If you're in Brazil or a few other places around the world, when they start daylight saving time, they go right from 11:59:59 of the night before up to 01:00. So you have to have those rules in your data to know that the start of day is not necessarily midnight. And Joda time is also non-mutating. It's immutable. So we have D1 and D2 here being different objects, the same as I showed you before. So what are we going to do? How are we going to get out of this mess where we don't have to use libraries or deal with an API that's broken? I think we should fix it. People think we should fix it? Let's fix it. So working on that is Maggie, sitting right up here. She's on the TC39 committee and representing the JavaScript Foundation. Moment.js is a JavaScript Foundation member, along with a lot of other really great libraries. Brian Turlson at Microsoft is also helping with this. And we've reached stage 1, which basically means we have the general approval of the committee to think about how we want to do a new data API. We have a general kind of idea about what we want, but it is not locked in. So definitely come take a look and give your opinions. We'll take issues on GitHub, we'll take pull requests, we'll take any way you want to talk to us, or just come find Maggie and talk to her after the talk here. Generally, we want to make date better. We want to learn from the APIs that have come before us, not just in JavaScript, but in other languages. We want to be comfortable for everybody who uses JavaScript. So it needs to be idiomatic. It needs to not bring in a whole lot of Java cruft and other things that don't apply in JavaScript, at least not today. And yes, we're going to do the 1 base months. We're not going to do 0 base months. I will put my foot down on that one. Possible ideas? Sure, it might look like Moment. It might look like Joda time. It might look like time for J. It might be that we just provide some missing functionality in the underlying platform so that date libraries can do what they need to do in a smaller and more direct way. But we don't know yet, so help us figure it out. Here's some examples, and you can see we have this zone date time object. That's a very Joda-like object, but I'm not doing a lot of object construction to get the time zone. I'm just passing them along as strings. If I want to add time, I might do something like add to and then put hours in string. And that's very Moment-like. So we can do some of those kinds of things. What else might we be able to do? This is actually a very complex problem if you're in a scheduling environment. If I say I need to run an event at the same time every day, but it's in the user's local day. So this is a starting point, and then I say I want the next 4 occurrences, but I'm crossing a daylight saving time transition. So 8 a.m. every day, even when the offset in the Pacific time zone changes from -8 to -7. And you can see here the UTC output has changed also. So I cannot schedule in UTC time, I need to schedule in local time. And doing that without a library is really, really hard with the JavaScript data object. Most people would just say plus 24 times 60 times 60 times whatever to get the next instant. But then you'll find you're running at 7 a.m. or 9 a.m. They'll be off by 1. Moments and other libraries can help, but we want to do this built in, and it would look something like this. So if you think this looks awful and you have a better idea, come talk to us. If you think this is great, let us know. And that's really all I've got. So please give your feedback. If you have other questions, come find me afterwards, or you can always post on Stack Overflow. If you just tag it with date, time, or time zone, I'll find it, probably. Lots of other people do as well. And I have a 6-hour-long course on date and time fundamentals on Pluralsight if you really want to dive in. So thank you very much.